Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here's Shehan Jeyarajah and Bobak Hayeri.
Hi, everybody. This is the College Football Survivor Show, where we are all about the race for the College Football Playoff Championship. I'm Bobak Hayeri, and I'm joined as always by the informed Shehan Jeyarajah, national college football writer for CBS Sports. You can find us on X at CFP Survivor Show, where you can participate in polls, see video highlights of the show, and send us feedback. We also have a new TikTok account at CFP Survivor Show, so you can be part of your lives there as well. But you know, what it boils down to is we're a podcast. We always appreciate it when you take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe to our show wherever you find us. Good reviews are always welcome. So this is a show that's all about the playoff race, and we have a pair of playoff games coming up on January 1st. Last show, we talked about some of the biggest questions that might define the CFP, and today we're going to look at some of the most important players on each of these four contenders, teams that we and just about everyone else agree all have a good shot at winning it all. So, Shehan, when we look at this, are we talking about the best players or the most deserving players? I mean, sorry, I don't mean to bring that up again, but tell our audience how we're going to be going through this.
The answer is number one on my board is Jordan Travis, because clearly he's the most valuable player of all time. No, I think that the way to approach this is, again, we went 1 through 10. We're going to start at the bottom, get to the top. This is a little bit more of like an X factor conversation. These are the guys who are load bearing, is I guess what you could say right now, heading into the college football playoff, whether that means that they are a key to their unit, whether it's that they are a key matchup maybe against the opponents that they're going to play heading into the field. I definitely have one person in mind when it comes to that. It can also be, look, if you were to take this player out, if they were to suffer an injury, which player on the board would their respective teams struggle to replace? A good example of this, right, is certain players on the board, right, like a wide receiver, for example. If Washington loses a wide receiver, that's a different thing than Michigan losing a wide receiver or Alabama losing a wide receiver. So that absolutely played in as well. One other thing that I'll mention, we put together our own lists of 10, so we'll go down each of our lists. My list, personally, I did not include any quarterbacks on the list. Everybody knows, I think, that the 4 quarterbacks heading into this playoff, 4 of the best quarterbacks in the entire country. 4 guys who have not made mistakes, who have made winning plays. 4 guys who either were top 10 Heisman finishers this year, have a chance next year potentially to be top 10 Heisman finishers, or maybe even more than that. So I thought, let's get a little bit deeper on my end in terms of trying to go to different position groups, feature different players than you might have heard of. We'll have plenty of opportunity between now and January 1st to say that Michael Penix Jr. is good. And so I decided, let's take a step back from those players and kind of look down the board. So that was my approach. Is that kind of how you approached it too?
I definitely thought, well, okay, the quarterbacks are going to be an obvious answer to some extent, with a few players on each of these teams that are quite notable. I did a mix of both, but I wanted to particularly take some emphasis, not just on, because we've talked about these quarterbacks in previous shows, to focus a little bit also exactly on those other players. Who do I think are some of the most important names to know? And I do like the way you phrased it, because I think that's actually a better way to think of it. If this player were to suddenly vanish or just not be able to play, how big of an impact would it be on that program and the way they play ball? And I think that's an absolute great way to look at it. And we'll start breaking these down as we continue with the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
So as we take a moment here to break down who are the important players that we think are on these teams heading into the playoff, I took an interesting approach, because when I went into this, especially when I ranked them, I started to think about which players are actually crucial to stopping the best players on the other team. Which means they're not necessarily the superstar that we think of when we think of the team involved, but they are going to absolutely, if they have a bad day, we're going to notice them for all the wrong reasons. So I was thinking initially, again, we're going in reverse order, Texas cornerback Jahdae Barron, because he's going to have to take on Rome Odunze. He's going to have to take on a lot of the strength of that Washington offense, which is the passing game. A lot of things, and we're probably going to talk about their run stopping ability, which is also tremendous. But I was thinking about the fact that if he has a bad game, we're going to find out about it. And he's been excellent. He's got 55 tackles, 4.5 tackles for losses, 22 stops. He's got an interception. He's made big plays all year round for the Longhorns. And, he's obviously an all Big 12 selection, all of that. So when it comes down to it, he's going to be one of the players who is going to be targeted a lot by the Huskies, and he's going to need to step up to keep them in that game and allow the rest of that exceptional defense to step up.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And actually, I'll even add to that. I had Jahdae Barron number 5 on my list. It's not just that he's a good player, because he is. Also, one-time Baylor commit, that's a whole other conversation. But Jahdae Barron he plays nickelback for Texas, and they move him around a lot. They use him in a lot of different ways, in coverage, getting closer to the line, as a secondary defender on a lot of different players as well. When you're playing a wide receiver group that Washington has, it's more than just winning one-on-one battles. It's more than just locking down an individual player. It's about trying to scheme up your entire secondary to make the game more difficult. Jahdae Barron has the ability to drop deep back into coverage. He has the ability to man up receivers. He has the ability to take away some of the short stuff. We see to a large extent, and by the way, this will lead into my guy, we see to a large extent that Washington likes to use the short and intermediate passing game as a replacement in some ways for the running game, so that they're able to spread the field and get defenses on their toes. Jahdae Barron is the guy who's going to be tasked with taking that away for Texas. And again, they have a good defensive backfield. Jaron Thompson, a very senior player, guy who's been around a long time. Keaton Crawford, Michael Taft, 2 very experienced players as well. But Jahdae Barron is the playmaker back there. And so I think that he's going to be a huge part. And that transitions me to my guy, who's playing for Washington, going against Texas's best player, Dillon Johnson, the running back for Washington. We have not seen any team this season run with any level of success on Texas, except for Oklahoma when they used the quarterback run game. That was it. That's the only time we saw it. But Dillon Johnson has saved his biggest moments for Washington's biggest games. And you saw him break off some big runs against Oregon. I believe he had 100-yard performances in both Oregon games. He was huge, like we saw in that win over USC, a huge amount of his yards coming after contact too. So this is a big-time player who has only gotten better as the season's gone along, and nobody has been able to run on Texas, including Ollie Gordon, including Taj Brooks. That's 2 of the 4 top running backs in the entire country this past season. Dillon Johnson's a different kind of runner. He is a physical runner. He moves downhill very well. And if he's able to just average 3.8 yards per carry, right? If he's able to keep the ball moving against a Texas defensive line that includes T'Vondre Sweat, remember that name, we'll come back to him, and Byron Murphy II, I think that changes completely the calculus with which Texas has to play this offense, and it opens things up for everybody else. So I like that we get a guy on both sides. Dillon Johnson for me at running back for Washington, Jahdae Barron at nickelback/corner for you.
Absolutely. It's interesting too, because when we talked about the difference in ranking some of these players, it is a little bit imprecise. I think there's almost tiers to it. So I want to caution that I could very well see that being a number 5 ranking player, especially when we're ranking. For me, I was trying to think of also just sort of generally, who are the players that got me the most concerned? I want to, even though it's early on in this ranking, because I wasn't sure where to rank him because of his position, but in terms of importance, I want to switch over to the Rose Bowl. Will Riker for Alabama, the kicker, because I think about the fact that how many times have we talked about Alabama's kicking game historically? I mean, if you look back to 2018, the whole joke was like, I remember every time we on our CFP, we throw up on Twitter like a kicker from whole, Canadian college football, Mexican college football, Japanese college football. There'd always be Alabama guys in the reply saying like Saban should give that guy a scholarship. Koji no show of Karami University. We got to get him. Is he in the transfer portal? Well, that was before the transfer portal, but can we get him on the team? So the fact that they have a guy who is such a reliable kicker. He's been 20 of 23 of the season. Long of 51. He's gone 3 for 3 at 50 plus kicks. Although most of them, again, must therefore be between the 50 and the 51. That's tremendous. That's something Alabama just hasn't had. And we expect with Michigan for that to be probably a close game, because Michigan is all about winning ugly. They're not about, when they've been in their toughest games, that defense, they rely heavily on it. And, it becomes, a game of field position, a game of trying to break it open. And I think Alabama, with their defense, is going to be absolutely playing to that kind of game. And if Alabama is going to get that edge, having that reliability in a kicker is going to be tremendous. Because I know Jalen Milroe, and he's obviously a huge part of it, but the ability to have someone reliable, that's one of those things that I wonder, I don't know if it's been talked enough, because for those of us who've seen the many flavors of this Alabama dynasty over the years, kicker has not always been one of their strengths. So Will Riker, you're my number one to lead this away team. I'm so sorry I had to make that reference, because I grew up with Next Generation, man. That to me, that's a part of my life. So I had to nerd out that moment, even though Deep Space Nine is the one true answer. But yes.
I love this pick. I didn't actually consider Will Reichard, and I probably should have considered him more. This I think is going to be a huge dynamic, especially in the Rose Bowl. You mentioned we expect it to be a low-scoring game, potentially a pretty ugly game. And Will Reichard is, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I can name all of Bear Bryant's kickers off the top of my head, but it has a really good case to be the best kicker in Alabama history. Some people didn't expect him back last year. He could have potentially gone pro. He does come back. He is a huge part of Alabama making its way to the college football playoff. And another factor to take into account, too, Michigan last year had a kicker named Jake Moody, who a lot of people thought was maybe the best kicker in America. And they replaced him well. James Turner has come in, only missed 2 kicks all year, 6 of 8 on 40-plus yard kicks. So a good number, but not necessarily a Will Reichard or Jake Moody type performance. So this could be a difference. When you talk about the gap in experience between these two players in the kicking game, that's huge. And I think you also look, you look at Washington's kicker, you look at Texas Bird Auburn, they are not the level of a Will Reichard in this game. So even in a title game, I think that Alabama is going to have the kicking advantage. So I like that a lot. This is where I get, a little more interesting. So like I said off the top, depth in a position group can impact how overall important I think a player is. So this might be a little low for this player, but Rome Odunze I have at number 9. And the 2 parts of this. One, he is the best receiver in the college football playoff. I don't even think it's debatable at this point. Texas has a couple of really good players, but I think that Odunze as an individual talent, as good as anybody in the country, as good as Marvin Harrison Jr., as good as Malik Neighbors, any of them. He's going to be a top 15 pick in the 2024 NFL draft. The thing that keeps him down a little is the fact that Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan are also going to be NFL draft picks this upcoming year. And so they don't rely on him quite as much as an individual player as some other guys that we're going to mention on this list. But especially since I don't have Michael Penix on my list, Rome Odunze is the game breaker on offense. This is a guy who again was a finalist for the Biletnikoff Award, was a first-team All-American by a lot of different outlets, and he's also one of the few guys in the college football playoff who can both make plays through the air by getting vertical, or he can make plays after the catch. He is a complete receiver, big body, physical. They're playing a Texas team that played a number of good receivers along the way, but this is a different kind of challenge for Jahdae Barron, for Ryan Watts, for all of these guys, for Terrence Brooks, than they've had to face so far this season. So Rome Odunze, clearly a top 10 most important player in this college football playoff. I have him at number 9.
That's a good call. It's so funny too, because I know some of the people that have been revealing how they have voted for the Heisman Trophy. Some of the folks had actually swapped Penix and Odunze, and put Odunze in their top three of their votes. Now that we've been hearing from some of the voters, which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure I would have gone that way, but I could see the argument almost certainly, and his talent is absolutely evident. So now I guess we're kind of discussing our number eights, although we're going to get quite a bit of overlap here. So I'm not going to necessarily repeat some of the ones that you've mentioned that were on my list, because Dunze was on my list too, but I'm not gonna get to him. I was thinking of, again, a player that is going to be important, not necessarily as important as some of the others on his team. Texas's CJ Baxter, because obviously he had to step up when Jonathan Brooks hurt his ACL, and he had carries before. He was able to get plenty of carries in the games prior to his injury. But then since then, he stepped up against Iowa State. He stepped up in the later games. He's a true freshman. He's 5 stars rating. We all know all of that. And he's been able to kind of step up. And I think when we see them go against Washington, that ability to get the running game going is going to fall. Obviously, he's not alone. They've got Robinson, they've got Jaden Blue, but I think a lot of it is going to be on Baxter as well. And I'm very curious to see how he was, because if he has another strong game, that's going to help viewers. It's going to help the entire program. And I think that's going to be one of those impact players for the Rose Bowl. Probably for the Sugar Bowl. Sorry. I love how it's not even natural, because I keep thinking like, where they're going. It's I always get these games mis-swapped on which ones they are, because they're just semifinals, baby. Where they are is wonderful, but this is all about the college football playoff.
Yeah, I assume CJ Baxter probably running into the corner of the end zone. Oh, wait, no, sorry, that was Vince Young. My bad.
Man, Ooh, you know how to get me there, man. Wow. I see. People always talk about that play. That play didn't bother me. The play that bothered me the most in 2005 was
fourth down.
No, it was actually the decision to do a lateral when there was no necessity to do a lateral. Reggie Bush just decided he was invincible. And they did interviews with the guy lateral too, because he was like, he didn't expect it. He's like, I didn't expect him to lateral the ball. I mean, we're just going to have great field position, and he decided to try and go for a dagger type of score. The other guy had no expectation. So you end up with a mysterious lateral that turns the ball over. And that was the moment where I'm like, we might actually lose this game. And they did. No disrespect to the rest of the team, but when you're playing that level of talent, you don't make stupid mistakes like that. So it's so funny. Everyone thinks of the in the run of the corner. To me, I'm like, no. To me, the game changed in that play, because then it just got USC's too full of themselves. This is going to come crashing down. But
yeah, to take us back. CJ Baxter was
now coming back from 2005. Here we are in the 2023 season.
Yes. CJ Baxter was the first guy off my list. I very, very much considered him. I think that my consideration was for him was, like you said, it's going to be a team effort running the ball. But if you could ball up all of those Texas running backs and put them into one, this might be a top 5 or even top 3 most important units. Just because when you look at Texas early in the year, when they struggled to gain much momentum offensively, there was the game where they entered the fourth quarter tied at 10-10 against Wyoming. Even the Alabama game, they kind of went on a 21-0 run, but it wasn't consistent necessarily. The thing that's changed about them between then and now has been the running game coming along. It was Jonathan Brooks at first. Now that Jonathan Brooks is out with a torn ACL, it has been the Baxter, Jaden Blue combination. And we've seen from them, each of them have had a 100-yard performance in the 3 games since Jonathan Brooks went out. And that's been huge for Texas. And it just makes their job easier. I mentioned it on this week's show. So much is pointed to about Steve Sarkisian and his passing offense, but this thing only works if you're able to continue to get tough yards. So I think CJ Baxter is a really good pick. Moving on over to my number 8, I'm going with Dallas Turner, the fantastic edge rusher from Alabama. Another player who I think you could make a very good case should be higher on the list, but he is a do-everything type player. It's not fair to compare anybody to what Will Anderson did the past couple of years, but he has essentially stepped into that role. He is good against the run. He's good against the pass. 13 and a half tackles for loss, 9 sacks so far this year. Just a freaky player. He teams up with Chris Braswell, another kind of edge rusher for them, who, it is one of the scariest combos that you have in college football. And I think probably the best edge rushing combination in the college football playoff this year. But Turner is a different kind of player because of his versatility. He's not a huge guy. He's not just somebody, maybe like an NFL style Micah Parsons where you're just lining him and having him scream off the edge. You have the ability to do some different things with him. You can line him up in different places. You can have him come up the middle. You can have him come off the edge. You can have him stop the run, whole 9 yards. And heading into a game against a Michigan offensive line that is extremely well coached and will have a month to get itself ready for prime time, I do think that it's going to be very important for Alabama to win just some straight up one-on-one battles, to get linemen and tackles in space and just win. And Dallas Turner is the guy who's best prepared to do that.
I love that pick. He was my number 6. And again, for me, it was kind of a shuffle of whoever I wanted where. But because he is just such a dominating force who can disrupt the other side and has proven that he can, and exactly, Michigan's going to have to plan around him. I'm very curious to see how they use him to, because I mean, again, Michigan has obviously Zach Zinter's injury has kind of created some issues on the offensive line that they've more or less kind of bandaged your rotating players. But if you have that level of talent across the board, again, with Braswell and Turner, to kind of create that level of disruption could create some problems in the backfield. And again, we've seen Michigan can make some adjustments against some other tough defenses, but it's just another flavor of defense they're going to have to adjust to. And what they saw in the Big Ten may be different than what they see from an SEC program. So I think that's a great call. I'm absolutely in support of that one. When it kind of just moving along with my own ranking, as we kind of finish out this first half of this group, I actually, again, going towards players who I think could make an impact, especially given the opponent, given the strengths of who they are and how they play. I went with Michigan's tight end, Colson Loveland, because I think if Michigan is going to do what worked against Alabama before and what Texas specifically got to work against Alabama, that ability to not just throw, because I mean, again, Alabama's got some excellent DBs, Kool-Aid, all of those guys. I think it's going to rely heavily on the ability to get some of these short passes, and we've seen Loveland. Again, we've talked about it. It isn't just him, but I mean, we've seen Loveland step up and become more of a featured part of that offense. And he's had a good chemistry with JJ McCarthy. He's got 40 receptions, 572 yards, 4 touchdowns. And there's a potential for a mismatch there where if he has a good game and if they decide to exploit them that way, and I'm sure Sherrod Moore is going to try that, there's some real potential for getting the ball forward and opening up that offense against what's going to be, again, a way to get around Dallas Turner and company. I'm really looking forward to seeing that one. And I think Loveland is going to be one of the keys.
Yeah, and let me go ahead and group in one of my next guys, my number 7 on the list, and that's center Drake Nugent for Michigan. So the reason that I think that these two players go together is that, one, when you talk about Colson Loveland, like you said, been a big time receiving threat for them, somebody who's able to get the ball out quickly, somebody who they're able to use as a safety blanket in a lot of ways. But I think that he's going to be just as important as a blocker in this game. Because when you talk about Michigan's rushing offense, they get outside. They don't just go up the middle. They're when you talk about a Blake Corum setting that edge, sealing defensive ends on the edge, that is a huge part of what they do. And I think that Loveland is going to be asked to do that quite a bit alongside Drake Nugent whenever you're talking about this matchup against Alabama. They're going to have to seal some guys. And one of the reasons that I picked Drake Nugent specifically is you lose Zach Zinter at right guard, probably the best overall lineman, maybe the best offensive player on the team for Michigan in 2023. They're going to have to move some stuff around to make things fit. We saw at times Carson Barnhart at right tackle struggled. They slid him inside a little bit to try to protect him a little more. They're going to need these two players, Drake Nugent and Colson Loveland specifically, to step up and help against the attack from Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell against Alabama. So I think this is a huge dynamic of the game. We talked about it earlier this week. can Michigan's offensive line hold up against players like Chris Braswell, like Dallas Turner, like some of the other guys that they're going to be bringing off the edge? This is, I think, the twosome of guys that will decide that most. Now, again, Drake Nugent plays inside. Colson Loveland is a tight end. He also does a lot of receiving work. But I think that it's more going to be, how do you scheme using these two guys to try to give your right guard and right tackle just a little bit more help when they're playing the kind of front that they really haven't had to play this year. With my number 6, I'm sticking in the Rose Bowl. Do you remember back in 2017, I think it was, there was a receiver who was pretty highly recruited coming out. Nobody had really known much about him. He kind of seemed like an afterthought heading into his own recruiting class because of the talent that Alabama had. And then Devontae Smith caught a game-winning touchdown, and his story was starting to be written, right? And then he goes on to become the greatest wide receiver in the history of Alabama. I'm not saying that Isaiah Bond is on that trajectory, but we have not had an Alabama an Alabama wide receiver come through and play that way since Devontae Smith. We haven't seen the dynamic first-round pick type receiver since Jameson Williams graduated after, obviously, he tore his ACL in 2021. I think that Isaiah Bond is proving himself as that kind of player. He, of course, catches the infamous 4th and 31 against Auburn that will go down in history, that people will play for the next 100 years. He had another great game in the SEC title game. And when I look at this Alabama receiving group, it is a flawed group. Jermaine Burton has come along, but I think that Isaiah Bond has the potential to be the kind of player who we come away from this college football playoff saying that is the next star at Alabama. And especially for a quarterback in Jalen Milroe, who's still coming along, who's still a little bit raw at times, especially as a passer, having somebody like Isaiah Bond continue to grow is a huge part of what I think can make Alabama successful. Again, we have seen that Jalen Milroe has the ability to throw the deep ball, and I think Isaiah Bond is growing as potentially his most reliable deep ball receiver. So don't be surprised at all if Isaiah Bond comes out and is suddenly the breakout player of the 2024 college football playoff.
Boy, I like that pick only because it goes to one of my own selections, which is the opposite side of that particular matchup, which is how well Will Johnson's going to be able to stop him. And obviously he was a little banged up. I assume he's going to be back full strength. By all accounts, he will be for the Rose Bowl. But that's going to be one of the best matchups in it, because if Johnson is anyway not at full strength, because when he's at full strength and when he's playing to his talents, he's one of the best defensive backs in the game, hands down. But if there's any weak spot in his game, I could see Bond taking advantage of it, and I could certainly see with Milroe throwing to him and the scheming that Tommy Rees is going to be doing, that they're going to have an opportunity to take advantage of it. So Bond is going to, Johnson's going to absolutely have to step up in this game, because quite frankly, in this game, and if they make it through the next game, I can't think of any of these teams where he isn't going to be absolutely crucial to any kind of defensive stop, and especially for the Michigan defense, that he's going to be a critical part of it. So if you have to say Bond, I have to add Johnson to it too. And I kind of put him in the middle as well. And I think that's as good a time as any to use as a compliment to Bond in that kind of selection. So next we'll break down the top 5 players that we see heading into the college football playoff here on the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
So, Shehan, as we kind of go through some of these impact players, these key players that are going to be a part of this college football playoff semifinal, I'm going to go back to Alabama. Kool-Aid, McKinstry, I think he's going to be a key part of anything. I mean, cornerbacks are so vital. Everyone always likes to talk about the allure of an offense, but so much of this are the guys that have to stop them. And Kool-Aid McKinstry has been one of the best corners in the game. He's part of the reason why the Crimson Tide defense is so solid and has, quite frankly, helped them when they were trying to even figure out their offense earlier on this season. So I think his matchup is going to be important. I think how he stacks up against, the Michigan, offense, and obviously the wide receivers at Michigan are not as runaway stars as they are on some of the other programs in this particular playoff. I think he's going to be a pivotal part of that. So it's funny because we just talked about Will Johnson previously, but on the other side of the ball, I should say on the other side of the defense, Kool-Aid, I think, is going to be an important part of that.
No, there's no doubt. I actually think that what's so interesting about this playoff and kind of about college football in general is there's been so much attention paid to receivers, but part of the reason that we don't see as many stars is because I think that the level of cornerback play in the country is exploding. We have so many cornerbacks on this list. There's another cornerback that I have higher up on my list that we'll definitely get to, but the level of coverage that guys are coming into college with and continuing to develop once they get there, it's impressive. And you mentioned Kool-Aid McKinstry, one of the best cornerbacks. I mean, I think that there's a good case that he is the best individual cornerback in the college football playoff. Some folks will argue with that, like you mentioned. Obviously a couple of really good players, but he is just consistent. He is a consistent player, and not just in a game against Michigan, where you obviously have some guys, maybe some that we'll mention, that obviously are going to be playmakers in those games, but also when you look at a college football playoff final. I mean, the Washington and Texas receivers, either of those groups is, those are top 3 units in the country at minimum. And so to have a cornerback who can potentially take one of those best players away, I think is a huge advantage. Well, that said, let's jump to my number 4. I'm going to go back to Washington, and there aren't a lot of standout defensive players on Washington, but Braylon Trice is one of them. And Braylon Trice, as a defensive lineman, defensive end type, is so critical to what they do. He is the true playmaker that they have in that front 7, especially on the defensive line. And he's going to have a tough challenge. These offensive lines playing in the college football playoff, especially the 3 that aren't on his team, these are 3 of the best offensive lines in all of college football. They're big, they're physical, they're mean. But so is Braylon Trice. He is a big-time electric pass rusher, somebody who's able to get to the quarterback, somebody who's able to cause mistakes. And especially when you talk about a matchup like this Texas game, making Quinn Ewers uncomfortable is such a huge part of beating Texas. We saw this with Oklahoma. They brought a lot of pressure from their front to try to make Quinn Ewers uncomfortable, and he rewarded them with 2 early interceptions in the first 6 minutes of the game. If you can get him out of his rhythm, I think that changes the way that they have to play football entirely. And so I think that Braylon Trice is the guy from Washington who will have to do that. He'll also need to be a big-time run defender as well against any of these teams. And, I think that a lot's going to be asked of him. They have good players at linebacker. They have some really good players in the secondary. But on the defensive line, it's Braylon Trice and then a rotation of guys. So he's, I think, going to need to be the leader of that group for Washington to have a chance to not just beat Texas, but to win the national championship.
I agree. He's their best pass rusher. He is a solid edge defender, and you're right. There's Jabbar Muhammad in the backfield, a couple other good people in that Washington defense, but we don't really talk about that line as much. And part again, when you have such an offense that people always with guys like Penix and Odunze, everyone wants to talk about them. We neglect the fact, and also maybe it is just kind of a Pac-12 thing. People always think like, oh, they don't really play defense. It's all about just teams kind of going at each other's throats with star quarterbacks. But no, they absolutely can, and you need that kind of a complete package to be a championship team. And clearly, as we said before, the defense there is what bailed them out of Arizona State. So yeah, I think that's a great pick. He was, gosh, I've actually lost track of how I ranked these guys because we've been kind of going through it, but he made my list. He was definitely one of my top 5s as well. Because I was actually debating between that because I don't want to include every corner. That's actually what I tend to do when I start looking at defenses. Because Jabbar Muhammad, I'm like, well, he's a strong player, but at the same time, that ability to disrupt and throw off viewers is really important, especially since he isn't necessarily, a running quarterback in the traditional sense where he can beat you with his feet. You want to get back there, you want to create disruptions, which certainly that's what Texas is going to be doing with Penix when it gets down to it. But goodness, this is kind of funny because I'm looking at my list. I'm trying to sort through who we haven't really talked about yet. I know. I can only imagine. Oh yeah, that's so funny. I'm seeing our producers kind of tucking in to see how I'm going to rank him. Honestly, my ranking seems to be a mobile quarterback right now, moving all over the field.
I do have our list down. So to just run through it. Yes. I have number 10, Dylan Johnson, number 9, Rome Odunze, number 8, Dallas Turner, number 7, Drake Nugent, number 6, Isaiah Bond, number 5, Jahdae Barron, number 4, Braylon Trice. You've gone through Jahdae Barron at 10, Will Reichard at 9, CJ Baxter at 8, Colson Loveland at 7, Dallas Turner at 6, and Kool-Aid McKinstry at 5.
That sounds pretty good. I'll go with those. The next player, though, I do want to bring up, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, too, because I wasn't sure where to rank them, because they're both star players. One is arguably stronger than the other, but I think I'm going to use this as my spot to bring up Byron Murphy II, because we're gonna get to his colleague in a moment. Almost certainly one of us will, but it's a 1-2 punch. And I don't care how you want to cut it. Both of them are obviously NFL caliber guys. And who knows even know when they get into the league, how they perform might be, we might reverse them in order. So I'm just going to say all of that. But he's an undeniable force with 26 tackles, 8 tackles for losses, 5 sacks, 19 stops. He is absolutely able to put pressure on the quarterback. I mean, he's got like 40 pressures, 30 hurries, something like that. So that ability to create that level of disruption with tandem with that entire defense, but he's a key part of it, is going to be how Texas will potentially disrupt that dynamic Washington offense, and that ability to get back there and create pressure and cause an otherwise... I mean, again, we've talked about Penix. He's got that kind of magic ability. He's got that ability just to make plays happen. But if you keep putting enough pressure on a guy, they're going to crack. And I think he's going to be one of those key reasons Texas, if they're going to win, it's going to be behind him and his compadre. But I'm going to put Sweat at this point in my rankings.
Yes. So the big thing with Byron Murphy is that, Sweat.
Murphy.
Yeah.
Got that.
Sweat we'll get to in just a second.
Yeah,
trust
we will
me.
get to him.
Murphy is a little bit more of the pass rusher of the duo. And one of the scariest things in football is interior pass rush. Like, think of it from the perspective of a quarterback, right? What you're trained to do is you're trained to drop back, look down the field. If you feel pressure coming around the edge, you step up. That's what you're trained to do. If Byron Murphy's there, that kind of changes what you're able to do. And all of these quarterbacks, again, have played behind pretty good offensive lines who have been able to give them protection. This changes the game when Byron Murphy is having a great game. I think of, JJ McCarthy, such a good pocket passer, right? If he is getting pressure up the front, I mean, you're suddenly starting to have, guys having to run around like they're Bryce Young out there. It is just a totally different kind of ball game if you're getting interior pressure. He's a hugely impactful player for that reason. Also a great contributor in the running game, though probably a little bit less so than T'Vondre Sweat. And this is, I keep coming back to it. These are the number 1 and number 2 ranked defensive interior players by Pro Football Focus. Like, number 1 and number 2 played for the same team right next to each other. It's crazy what he's been able to accomplish this year. I like that pick a whole lot. I'm going to stick on defense for my next pick. Going to move back over to the Rose Bowl in Michigan. Mike Sanders still is one of the most playmaking cornerbacks that I can remember. He is everywhere where a play happens. I think that we feel it at times. Maybe technically he's not as elite as some of these other guys, but he knows how to recover with the best of them, whether it's a key interception, whether it's a pick six, whether it's a pass breakup. He is just one of those kinds of guys who, even though he doesn't seem to have all of the physicals, he just always makes a play. And going into a matchup, like you mentioned, against Isaiah Bond, against Jermaine Burton, against a quarterback like Jalen Milroe, he is a playmaker. And I think that Michigan's going to need those plays heading into the college football playoff. We talked about at times that offensively, this is not a very explosive Michigan team, but they've made up for it in a lot of ways by at times being explosive defensively. And I think that Mike Sanders still is a huge part of what they want to do. And again, like with Will Johnson on one side, if you can shut down that other side and Mike Sanders still can have a good game, I mean, it changes the way that you have to play offense against this team, because then all of a sudden you're having to challenge the middle of the field where you've got Junior Colson, where you've got that defensive line, where you've got those NFL safeties. So I think he's going to be a very important player in this game. And if Michigan beats Alabama, I think that Mike Sanders still has an interception in this game, maybe even one that immediately sets up a touchdown. That would be my guess.
I think that's a great call. And I think he's such a versatile player. And we sometimes get so distracted by the top wide receiver, the top defensive back, when really it's that entirety of it. I mean, there's been plenty of offenses and defenses, but offenses, again, they tend to be more highlighted. But like over time, I think any of our listeners who've played attention to some of the best teams out there know it's not always receiver number one, it's receiver number two and number three that get those key plays that force the defense into chaos and allow the team to kind of march down there. So for that very reason, having someone like Mike Sanders still back there running around and able to make those key plays, I think that he's an important part of it, especially when you're playing a team with the level of talent across the board like Alabama, because they've got their own group of wide receivers. So they're going to need someone who can get there and come in the key plays all over the field. I think that's a great call. And I think that's why, oddly enough, he is maybe perhaps an unsung hero in some of this, in terms of one of the key players where if he doesn't perform well, we're going to find out real quick. Exactly that entire the strength of that offense is going to come. Probably the strength of that defense is going to come apart, especially against such a relentless offense like Alabama can be. So let's see here. I'm going to go next with kind of a safer pick, and going back to Texas only because AD Mitchell is going to be absolutely a key part of that offense, and getting that passing attack moving is going to be another part of it. And it's particularly if they can take full advantage of, because I expect it to be, it's so funny. We're talking about how much of a wrestling match it's going to be between Michigan and Alabama. In the Sugar Bowl, I think we're expecting more of offensive fireworks. And I think he is going to be a key part of the Texas offense. And for that reason, he's one of my key picks, especially we're holding off a little bit on the quarterback. So I'm going to talk about, it's the same reason why we're talking about Odunze versus Penix. I think having that kind of a key offensive weapon is going to be another important part of what gives Texas an edge if they're going to take advantage of that game.
Well, the funny thing, too, about AD Mitchell is that dude loves the college football playoff. He scored a touchdown in every single playoff game that he's played in. He continued that streak, by the way, by having a touchdown in the Big 12 championship game as well, one that really kind of ended the game. And he is just built for these moments in so many ways. And over the course of the 2023 season, playing for Texas, he was the guy who broke opposing defenses. He would get behind the defense. He would take a ball, 50 yards after the catch. He would completely embarrass a cornerback. He is an absolute playmaker. We've actually, in our work, like chats, we've talked a lot that maybe AD Mitchell might be after, that top 3 in the NFL draft. Maybe he's number 4. Maybe he is a legitimate first round prospect if some things break right and if he tests well at the combine. And heading into the year, obviously, all the conversation was about Xavier Worthy at wide receiver for Texas. And Xavier Worthy has been really good. But I would argue that AD Mitchell has been the game breaker. He's been the thing that's taken this passing offense from good to unbelievable at times this season. And it's the playoff. He's going to show up. He's going to score a touchdown. And, AD Mitchell's been part of 2 college football playoff squads and both won the national championship. So that's not a bad place to start.
That is incredible when you think about it. And again, exactly. It's going back to the fact that you've got Xavier Worthy out there, but sometimes it's that second receiver. And even then, it's a weird thing to say that with someone like AD Mitchell, but he's become one of the frequent downfield targets. He is absolutely able to do that. And that creates a dynamic offense that becomes a problem for whoever they go against. So I agree 100%. Who you got next?
Yeah. So we're moving up to number 2 on my list. And that's where I'm going to go with T'Vondre Sweat. And T'Vondre Sweat just won the Outland Trophy as the best interior lineman in all of college football.
So deserved.
Yeah, well deserved. An award that I vote on. And he is like a top 5 rushing defense just by himself. He is that kind of player. He is so big. He is so freaky. He moves so well. I don't want to say I've never seen a player like him, but as a run stuffer at the college level, it's unbelievable. I'm telling everybody, go look up the photo of him walking into the stadium in his like turtleneck with his giant chain. It looks like he's wearing a sumo suit underneath his clothes. He is so wide. It is unbelievable, but he still moves well. I think he's listed at 364 pounds, and he looks every one of them. But you see, again, I mentioned it. They played Taj Brooks, who finished number 4 in the country in rushing yards this year. They played Ollie Gordon, who finished number 1 in the nation in rushing yards this year. And they shut them both down. It was really not much of a struggle for them either with the way that they play run defense on the interior. Now, he's a little bit less of a pass rusher, like I mentioned, than Byron Murphy is. But if you're able to basically eliminate one half of an offense because you've got a guy who's a freak, that'll do. I mean, that'll do. And so for me, he was number 2 on my list of most important players in the college football playoff.
I think that's a great call. He was probably my number 1 if we're not including quarterbacks, because of how dominating he will be, and especially against that Washington. Because again, with Washington, we know that was one of the ways Arizona State took advantage of them, is they were rushing well up the middle. And when you have stepping up to the best person in the game currently, he's absolutely going to be one of the most important players in all of it. So if I'm going to put one more player out there as I kind of round this out, I'm going to also go with Blake Corum, only because when I'm thinking about players who their performance could very well make or break their team, if Blake Corum can get the running game going and again, he isn't just him, but again, I'm thinking about, if Donovan Edwards somehow comes out there and, Alex Orji comes out as kind of that running quarterback. Of course, when he comes out there, I'm pretty sure Alabama is going to know what's going to happen if they march him out there. But Blake Corum, they know he's a running back. They know he's out there and he's able to get those hard yards. If they can put things on his shoulders, if they can rely on that, and if he can perform, and it's obviously the offensive line is going to be a huge part of that in and of itself. If he can get a game going, that's going to be a lot of trouble for Alabama. And his game, his success on the field, and part of me also gets into sort of a chicken and egg. Is he doing well because the rest of the offense is also doing really well and kind of forcing Alabama to not necessarily play the right way or play the way they would like to take advantage of it? Or is it just going to be him pushing the entire offense putting offense on his shoulders and carrying the load? But I think how he performs is going to be a really key indicator in whether or not Michigan's going to be able to defeat Alabama in the Rose Bowl.
No, it's a great call. This has been a Michigan rushing offense that has not been as complete and as consistent as it has been in years past. So you mentioned how much of Blake Corum's production is the offense doing well and him taking advantage, how much of it is him creating it. This game is going to decide it, I think, in a lot of ways. Last year, I would make the case that it was a little bit more, I don't want to call it system, because I don't want to sound like Blake Corum's not incredible, but I do think it was a little bit more doing stuff within the system last year. This year, behind an offensive line that's had more inconsistent play, I do think that he's been more of an individual playmaker than we've seen in years past. And this is the game where we need him to break off big runs. This is the game where we need him to have that moment, where we need him to make the game easier for JJ McCarthy. And so I like this pick a whole lot. He's going to be a very important player. I'll also put alongside with him, Donovan Edwards has not been himself this year. Last year, I think that many people would have argued that he was the better running back of the two. He had more explosive upside. You saw what he did against Ohio State last year. It was unbelievable. And this year, coming off of surgery, he has not been that player. So it's not just Blake Corum that I think needs to take a step up. I think that Donovan Edwards needs to enjoy his month off and come back ready to compete at a high level, because they really need that from this Michigan attack. They need an explosive component. Trust me, we're going to get there again in 1 second. But before we get to our number 1 overall, let's touch on the quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. So for me, looking at where I have everybody, I think that my most important quarterback on the list, who I would probably have number 1, I think it's Michael Penix Jr. I think that he is just so important to what this team does that I think I'd have him number 1. But I could also hear an argument for Jalen Milroe in that same sort of way. Who would you have number 1 among the quarterbacks on your list?
I 100% agree with Penix, because no team in this playoff relies more on their quarterback success, or their quarterback's integral to their success, quite as Washington. And I agree, Milroe's probably my number 2, but only because so many of those games where things have come on the line, both Oregon games, he's been the key decision maker, the key to making that offense click. excuse me, and has been absolutely a vital part of that. So I think Penix is my number one in terms of the quarterback group, and arguably we could say overall in terms of whether his success will make or break their playoff run. And Jalen Milroe, again, because we saw how Alabama changed when they figured out how to use him correctly. And even in the game where they're having a disaster of the game against Auburn, he still was the reason why they were able to come out of that one on top. Um, it's a close one, but only consistently throughout the entire season has Penix been the reason why. So I think he would be my number one among the quarterbacks as well. The other two, and this is where it gets interesting. Maybe I don't know, would yours be the final one only because they have such talent behind them right now? Because everyone would just, the Texas fans would probably have a very interesting mixed thoughts if suddenly Arch Manning had to come out in the middle of the game in the playoff and become a legend. Can you imagine that? Oh my gosh, that's just a scenario that would be. I mean, I don't want to. Hopefully, not for injury purposes or anything, but just like imagine Arch Manning coming out and winning it for Texas. Boy, goodness gracious. I don't even want to know. Like they would be, and I mean this in the most respectful way, they would be so insufferable in the offseason. I could only imagine what we would hear. But again, with JJ McCarthy, it's more of in between. Again, we've talked about that. I just want him to not make too many errors if they're going to make a chance. If for Michigan to win, he just has to keep it under control and keep that offense humming. So among the four, Penix is by far the one. I agree. Where if Washington's going to win, it's going to be on his shoulders.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely where I'm leaning. But with that said, who is the number one player, the most important player in the college football playoff to you?
Well, it's interesting because we kind of, as we were hinting that, for me, it is Mr. Sweat. He is absolutely the dominating reason why I think T'Vondre Sweat, if he can dominate against Washington, he's going to absolutely wreck that game. Because for the very same reason, I just said Penix is the entire reason why Washington could win it. Sweat could single-handedly disrupt that backfield and cause so much havoc for Washington that they just simply, they may fall apart. They may turn into a pumpkin. I mean, we were always worried about that through the entire season. Like after that first Oregon game, we kept talking about like, what's up with Washington? And Penix would somehow pull something out of his hat and make the team successful. Sometimes, and again, last year we saw it a bit with Caleb Williams, only because he kind of got a little bit dinged up in the Pac-12 title game, and they completely fell apart, and Utah ran in completely over them. So I don't know if that's what we would see with Washington. Washington overall is a much better program, I think, right now, just talent-wise across the board. So I don't want to say this is like a Grinch type of defense or anything like that. But if T'Vondre Sweat can get back there and create that level of disruption, I think he could make them fall apart. And similarly, if assuming they were to get past that, and again, I'm not gonna. We'll maybe do predictions down the road, but against the other two teams, if they go into the title game, I think he's going to be just as important because his ability to create that level of havoc and disrupt the most important players on the offense of the other side will absolutely be a game breaker situation. And I think he has a potential and the talent to be a legend. I mean, he already is on that highest level. He could go into the stratosphere depending on how he performs in this. And because if he somehow flops, or heaven forbid, he somehow gets injured, that's going to really change the entire color of how we view that burnt orange defense, or how we want to say it that way. I think it's gonna his strength and his talent is gonna be vital to the Texas performance.
No, there's no question about it. I think that he is an unbelievably important player, as important a player as there's been in college football this year. We've said it time and time again this year. Texas is a good offensive team with an elite defense. And when you look at the biggest strength of that defense, it has been their ability against the run. It has been their ability to make teams one-dimensional, force them to go to the outside, force mistakes from them. And T'Vondre Sweat is right at the center of it. Like you said, the Outland Trophy winner, a first-team All-American. I think that he has a really interesting chance to make a first-round NFL draft case this year. Nose tackle's tough in the NFL. Sometimes they get a little underdrafted versus other positions, but I think that he has the potential to be that kind of player, a day one starter in the NFL, somebody who plays in the NFL for 10 years. So a big-time player for sure, a huge key to what Texas wants to do this year. And also, again, you look at what Texas was in 2022, which was a good 8-5 team, and you compare that to what they are this year, which is the 12-1 Big 12 champions and number 3 seed in the college football playoff. their defensive improvement has spurred that. And T'Vondre Sweat has been at the center of that. So I absolutely love that pick for number one. I'm going to go a little bit of a different direction for my number one. So when you look at Michigan, my biggest question about them is, what are you going to do against these teams, against Texas, against Alabama, and against Washington, that's explosive? And you look at their receiver room. I don't think personally that they've been good enough. There are 357 players in college football with at least 40 targets this year. Cornelius Johnson ranks 336th in yards after catch per reception. That sucks, right? A little bit further up the board at 280th is Roman Wilson, who is my number one most important player in the college football playoff. Roman Wilson has been a consistent player for Michigan. He's been somebody who is sure-handed. He's been somebody who has been a possession receiver for them. He's been a safety blanket at times for J.J. McCarthy. And we saw last year in the college football playoff game against TCU, he has an explosive component to his game whenever he gets going. But we haven't seen it with any level of consistency this year. It has been a struggle to get down the field, to create opportunities. And Michigan's been able to win, even against their good opponents, close games where they didn't just mow over teams. But you can't do that whenever you're playing against Jalen Milroe and Rome Odunze and Quinn Ewers and A.D. Mitchell. You have to be explosive. Again, Roman Wilson, 280th in yards after catch per target. Like that is not going to cut it heading into the college football playoff against really good receiver rooms. On paper, Michigan has the worst passing game by a mile out of these four teams. And at some point this season, J.J. McCarthy was seen as an NFL draft pick and a Heisman finalist potentially. And that's taken a step back, and they kind of went away from their passing game. They're not going to be able to move away from their passing game and have any chance of beating an Alabama or any of the other teams in the field. So to me, Roman Wilson has to step up, prove himself as a legitimate NFL caliber receiver, as a legitimate explosive component to their offense. And if he's able to do that, I think that changes the ceiling of this team. If he isn't able to do that, I don't think Michigan even has a chance to win a game.
That is a great pick. I didn't even think of it that way because, again, he's certainly not the flashiest receiver with all the different people we have on all of these teams, but his success on that field is going to be vital to getting that offense moving. Because you're right, they can't just run it 32 times in a row. That will not go anywhere, especially
Chris Braswell might have something to say about that for Alabama.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think that's a great pick. Man, what a great list. Goodness. We've had so many good players. I cannot wait to, this is getting me hyped. I mean, there's too much time before. I mean, too bad next year we'll already be getting ready for first round of playoffs. So we'll be super hype about that. But goodness, we still had this great buildup. What a great way to kind of wrap that up and look at this. So so why don't you run down who your top 10 were? And I'll just pretend like I remember my top 10 because I'm completely lost on my own. But yours is more organized than mine. I'd love to hear yours. Yes. So run us down your top 10 one more time.
Yes, number 10, I had running back Dylan Johnson from Washington. Number 9, Rome Odunze, wide receiver. Number 8, Dallas Turner, the great edge rusher from Alabama. Number 7, Drake Nugent at center from Michigan. Number 6, Isaiah Bond, wide receiver from Alabama. Number 5, defensive back, nickelback, Jahdae Barron from Texas. Number 4, we've got Jalen Trice from Washington. Number 3, Mike Sanderstill from Michigan. Number 2, T'Vondre Sweat from Texas. And at number 1, the most important player in the college football playoff, Roman Wilson, wide receiver, Michigan.
That was exceptional. I think my only really oddballs were Will Reichard, only because the kicker might come into play. And again, he was the mysterious one, but I love that list. And I threw in a few more, but that was great. Oh my goodness. Well, I just wanted to thank all of you for listening. This was a College Football Survivor Show. I hope you enjoyed our little rundown of some of these key players that you should look out for as we head to this college football semifinal on January 1st. I wanted to take a second to thank our producer, Joey Aliberti. Be sure, if you get a chance, to like, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on X or TikTok at CFB Survivor Show. I'm Bobak Shehan. He's Shehan Jayaraja. You can find his work at cbssports.com. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bowl season's here.
the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.